Although retrieving content from the page is pretty cool in and of itself, typically that's not enough. Usually you need ways to manipulate the page content once you have it, and luckily jQuery gives us some really good ways of doing that, and that's what we're going to examine in this section. Once you've used the selectors and filters to get the content out of the web page, typically you're going to want to do something with it. In addition to that, there are times when you're going to want to create new content to add into the page dynamically. For this purpose, you use jQuery's content manipulation functions. As you're about to see, there are functions for creating and copying and deleting and moving content around, as well as wrapping page content inside other content. In addition to manipulating content, jQuery provides some really good cross-browser support for working with CSS information, including positioning and sizing, and that's what we're going to take a look at. Let's look at getting, creating, and setting content. So to create new HTML content, you basically just pass a string containing the new HTML to the jQuery function, and looks something like this. The result of this statement will be a new jQuery object, a new wrapped element, a result set, if you will, that contains the HTML that you've passed in as the string there. And since it's just a string, it also works really well if you want to pass in a variable as well. So you can make a new variable, call it myString, pass it into the header, and it all works fine. In addition to this method, you can use jQuery's HTML and text methods to get and set content on elements. And if you look at the table here, you'll see what these methods do. So the HTML method with no arguments basically returns the current HTML content of the first matched element that comes back from the selector's result set that you're calling this function on. However, if you pass it some content, then that sets the HTML content of every single matched element in that set. Similarly, the text functions work pretty much the same way. You call it with no argument, and that means get the text content of the first matched element. Otherwise, if you pass it some text, it will set the text content for all the matched elements. The main difference between text and HTML is that if you pass HTML code to the HTML function, it will actually create real HTML for you. If you try to pass a string into the text function, however, that contains HTML, the text function will automatically escape it for you. It'll change angle brackets into text representations. It's not going to actually create HTML code. Let's jump over to the code and take a look at some of this in action. Bring it to design view. And you can see this is very similar to the file that we've been using. We have some paragraphs, we've got some list items. So let me go back into the source. What we're going to do now is test out the HTML function to see what it does. So we're going to write jQuery here, and let's pass in a selector that gets us that unordered list. And let's get the HTML for it. And let's display that in an alert. Okay. Run this in the browser. And you can see that the alert is displaying the HTML content that is inside of that UL. Okay, so let's go back to the code. Let's get a little bit more fancy now. Let's change the HTML of that list. Let's see, we're going to comment this one out. Let's write something like this. Pass in the list. And this time we're actually going to set the HTML. And we'll set the HTML to just some new list item. This is a new list item. Okay. So now, when we run this, you're going to see all the list items that are currently there. They're going to be blown away because we're changing the HTML that's going inside the UL tag. So let's go back to the browser. Okay, so let's refresh. And you can see that all those list items were replaced by the new one. Let's keep on going. Go back to the code editor. So here we are. Let's comment that one out. All right, let's try something else. Let's try creating some new content. So I'm going to write var new item equals, and we're going to pass a string to the jQuery object, and we'll make a new paragraph. I'll say this is a new paragraph, and we'll close that off. So now we've created a new paragraph. Let's insert it somewhere. So let's get a reference to paragraph 2 right here, And let's say, okay, that HTML is now going to be set to the new items HTML. Let's run that in the browser and see what happens. I'm going to refresh. And you can see that the contents of that paragraph have now been changed. Okay, let's try one more thing. This time we'll use the text function. Comment these guys. Let's try one more thing. Let's do something like this. We'll say, well, let's get the last paragraph, and we'll set the text to be, this is the last paragraph. Let's try running that. We'll save. Go to the browser. Okay, let's refresh. So you can see how you can create and get and set content using a couple of very basic jQuery functions. So let's move on to our next lesson.